John Dale is the American Forest Director for Forest Restoration in the Texas Rio Grande River Valley. I'm sorry, Rio Grande Valley, and is the chair of the Thornforest Conservation Partnership, which is a coalition of agency, nonprofit, research, and industry stakeholders working toward a unified goal of biodiversity conservation in the Rio Grande Valley's four-county area. John has 20 years of experience in planning and implementing ecological restoration and natural resource monitoring projects throughout Texas, the U.S., and in the neotropics, while also working with a wide range of conservation and agricultural nonprofits, agencies, universities, and environmental consulting firms. So there you go. John, I'll hand that over to you and look forward to hearing your talk.
Perfect. Thank you, Nate. Can you hear me? Just double checking here.
Yep, I got you.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all. This is an honor to speak to y'all today. I'll try to do my best to kind of fill you in on what we're doing down here in the valley. So as Nate mentioned, I'm the director for the Rio Grande Valley for the national nonprofit American Forest. So I'm based out of the valley. Today I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about American Forests. We'll talk about the Thornforest Conservation Partnership as a function of American Forests. But I really wanted to kind of dial it back a little bit and give you all an overview of what we're doing down here, since I kind of get that question a lot about, American Forest, what are you guys about? What's going on down there? That kind of thing. So I'll kind of lay those things out, that bigger picture for y'all, lay that out for y'all today. So American Forests, we are a nonprofit. We're focused on preserving forests and their benefits to communities and biodiversity. We're primarily based in the U.S., although we do have some activity going on outside of that at this stage. Our two major national programs are tree equity and resilient forests. So our tree equity branch is really focused on primarily on urban forestry. So that encompasses a lot of work in cities throughout the country. And then the Resilient Forest Program, which I'm a part of, really tackles more of like the landscape picture, the different restoration ops. We offer science-based planning, sponsored research, carbon finance, those kind of things to supplement the program for the Resilient Forest Program. This is something I wanted to share with y'all. This is an update we have what's called an impact model. Not every, I guess, pretty much every organization has one, but this is kind of like one that we've developed over time here. So you can look at either side there, but I'll just go through it really quickly. We contribute in any given geography. We contribute science and data. Field staff capacity. This is a 30,000-foot view, by the way. This is like a big picture. Private match funding, so that's corporate sponsors along those lines. Coalition building, advocacy for agency needs and communication. So and we'll talk about this throughout the talk today, but it's really finding finding partners and then kind of identifying the gaps. For lack of a better term, where a particular agency or a group can use additional emphasis or expertise in trying to get an agenda through. And our impact model really just kind of bears that out. We've kind of distilled this over time. Movement building on the left-hand side, movement building, place-based partnerships, and then what we call the innovation lab. Coalitions, campaigns, career pathways programs, those kind of things, and obviously public policy in the movement building category. And then place-based partnership could be for an urban or a large forest landscape. And we'll dig into that a little more as we go through the slideshow here. But the innovation lab, it could be tools, research, reports, technical guides, all the different tools that you could really call those tools, all the different things, all the different innovations that you need to kind of move the ball in terms of whatever aspect you're looking at. Let's see here. And then There we go. I'll just talk a little bit about the program comparisons. The tree equity piece, that a lot of this is intuitive, that there's a focus on the human dimension there. That human environment, that kind of built environment. So, whether it's, we talk about cities, but it could be, para-urban areas. It could be like, areas that are urbanizing. There's a need to address, the availability of trees. When we talk about tree equity, we're talking about things like shade. Maybe some of these low income parts of different cities have, for whatever way for whatever trajectory and development they took, they've got less shade, there's less canopy. And so the tree equity program focuses a lot on getting additional trees into these maybe lower income neighborhoods, that kind of thing. So kind of, finding that balance between maybe the different, parts of the city, the different areas, the different demographics, that kind of thing. But again, there's that focus on the human environment. So obviously parks, public centers, that kind of thing. And then with resilient forests, we're looking at trying to restore or maintain landscape level processes. So, restoring forest in support of, restoring a watershed, that kind of thing. We're looking at kind of like that bigger picture there with some of those processes. Commercial forestry, wilderness, preserving those areas. Biodiversity conservation can figure into really either one, but especially in the resilient forests. Species recovery and those restoration and support of species recovery, those kinds of concepts. And we do work on both public and private lands. And then there's significant overlap, obviously. You can't, there's community engagement can be in either one of these socio-ecological dimensions, like I said, watersheds, what about runoff into the Laguna Madre, that kind of thing? Are we restoring, Thornscrub down here to do that kind of thing? And then climate resilience is another one. It's a major theme for American forests, probably as much or more so than most other nonprofits across the country, is this climate resilience aspect. And we'll talk more about that later. This is a little bit dated map. But I wanted to throw this on there just so y'all understood that, the work we have going on, my work down here in the lower Rio Grande Valley is just a part of a larger piece of a larger puzzle throughout the country. This is a 2020 projects map, and of course we've got probably twice as many projects going on now in 2022. But this kind of gives you an idea of the scope and of the different forest ecosystems that we're working in. I'm kind of way down here. And then you've got all these different areas throughout the southeast and the Appalachians and the Great Lakes area, and then especially we have a huge footprint out west. We're working really actively with the Forest Service to do a lot of good things out there. So my colleagues are primarily out west in the western U.S. But this kind of gives y'all an overall idea of the different places we're working with. As far as who we're working with, that can vary as well. For the South Texas region down here, for the Rio Grande Valley, it's my primary partner down here agency-wise is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I also work with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, but that's really a factor of all that larger land base, that larger base of public lands that the Fish and Wildlife Service has in this geography. But out west, it's the Forest Service. That's the primary partner, or it could be the Bureau of Land Management, that kind of thing. So there's some variation there, but that's just kind of a general concept there where we work. So we're going to focus on the valley, the Rio Grande Valley. So Cameron, Hidalgo, Starr, and Willacy County is kind of like the traditional definition there of the region. The next few slides, I'm just going to kind of lay out what is compelling us to act down here, what is compelling American Forest and the Thornforest Conservation Partnership, what is compelling our action down here. So the region, we basically sit in the middle of the Tamaulipas biotic province. So I don't always look at the different updates on ecoregions and all this kind of thing. This is what it'll always be for me, the Tamaulipas biotic province. So we start up on the north end, around San Antonio, kind of neighboring in there with the adjacent to the Edwards Plateau. And it's actually a binational ecoregion. It extends, about 400 miles, roughly 400 miles from north to south, down into, through the valley and down towards Victoria and south central Tamaulipas. And so right in the middle of all that, and on that, on the north end, again, you've got, the Edwards Plateau. On the south end, you've got, some of the northernmost extensions of tropical forest, true tropical forest around Seattle, the Biosphere Preserve, down around, just south of Victoria in that area. So we're right, the valley straddles that, and because of that, we've got this biodiversity, among other reasons. We've got a lot of pieces. There's a lot of neotropical species that barely, kind of make that extension up into the valley. Some of these obviously, over time have been moving north, and the famous stories, blade whistling duck and all these other species kind of moving north that can be found much further north now. But we're kind of like the gateway down here for a lot of this neotropical biodiversity that's coming in, or that has always been here, but that just barely gets into our political boundaries. And so this is just a grab of a bunch of different images. But a lot of this stuff is a lot of these species their distributions are pretty much limited to South Texas and then even the valley, the 4 counties. So that's kind of what we're working towards. That's what we know. When we've got this ecosystem that's got this richness and biodiversity. And that includes endemism. We've got some of that as well down here. How are we going to describe, what we're working towards? The Rio Grande Valley's, we'll call it woodlands here. I always, just as an aside here, I always get, kind of jabbed or ribbed. My colleagues out west are like, you guys are talking about a forest, right? That we're talking about like in the Sierra Nevada, this kind of thing. Like, yeah, I'll put my thorn forest or my Thornscrub or my monte there, my brush, my whatever it is for semantics, I'll put that up against your Sierra Nevada any day. So yeah, this is what we're talking about here. Rio Grande Delta soils, you've got there's a real drop off, between those 4 counties. And then as you go further north into the sand sheet, there's a lot of difference there in terms of, geology and those underlying soils to help support the forest down here. And then you've got some of those nearby uplands, I guess, that are technically not part of the Delta, maybe out on the west end of Starr County, that kind of thing. A high degree of what I would call subtropical trees, shrubs, vines, that kind of thing. Again, that that same aspect that we just talked about in the previous slide. Doesn't have to be a bird or any kind of other vertebrate species. We're talking about trees and shrubs that have centers of distribution that are further south in Mexico, and then a lot of that just kind of barely gets up here into these 4 counties. So high end estimates, 3,000 to 8,000 woody plants an acre. I mean this is legit. I mean this has been actually quantified out there. I mean not every old growth piece of thorn forest or thorn scrub in the valley has these numbers, but this has been actually quantified in the field up to 8,000 woody plants per acre. So just extremely dense. To the point where if you didn't have a trail system on some of this mature stuff, you're crawling through it on your stomach if you're crawling through it at all, that kind of thing. And that's what it needs to be, to provide that cover to the wildlife here. This goes, for any area, right? But I mean, we talk about the benefits, ecosystem services, that water filtration, carbon sequestration, obviously, sediment, runoff mitigation. All of these rates variable, even within different types of thorn scrub down here. But the value is definitely there. And then, some of these other pieces, economic, social, environmental benefits. We've got a stellar tourism industry here. have for many years, thanks to the hard efforts of so many folks. And there's a little bit of variation there, but my figures show between 130 and 300 million per year if you factor in all the different pieces of that, all the hotel rooms and entry fees and that kind of thing. So it's definitely a moneymaker. It's a economic resilience strategy really for the region for sure. Recreation kind of goes without saying. The different refuges and the different natural areas outside of maybe even outside the refuge system. Different ways to have recreation in the region that are dependent on these things, these forests, and then biodiversity conservation. So the thorn forest types, so a lot of y'all probably recognize this. I mean, we could go on all day about this, but yeah, I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of variation going from Falcon Lake all the way to Laguna Madre. I'm just throwing the ecological systems classification on here from the 2016 piece, but yeah, anything from palm groves to lomas to sandy mesquite dense shrubland, that kind of thing. It can be pretty imposing, but you have the a lot of times these signature species that occur in these different areas. You take a species like Texas ebony. It's growing on it's growing a few feet above sea level on the coast, and it's in really salty soil, and it's only topping out at maybe 5 or 6 feet tall. And then you go further inland 20 miles towards Harlingen or Weslaco, and that same tree, in a different soil could be 40, 50 feet tall. So, a lot of it, like we were saying earlier, excuse me, like we were saying earlier, a lot of it comes down to, so much of this comes down to soils, that substrate that we're working with. Now we'll talk about some of the changes that have, occurred over time in the region. This is just something I usually throw open in these kinds of talks. That landscape change, beginning in the 1700s. Reynosa was, way back when, before Texas, before it was, before the Rio Grande was a political boundary. A lot of these areas were kind of settled by some of the same folks that came up. So, for example, Reynosa, roughly late 1740s, I think around 1750 was the settlement period for that town, and some of the other towns that are on the south side of the river down there. I mean, you can kind of see that working clockwise on the slide here. Everything was cut up a lot differently back in those days. The Spanish land grants, those porciones that came off the river, a lot of those extended onto the south side of the river. That same delineation. They weren't drawing distinction between it in those days. This is late, the 1700s, early 1800s. And then that, if you can, so we're talking about a land use history, that goes back several hundred years now. Ranching, of course, the dominant, still dominant in so many areas, and it was dominant throughout the valley up until the early 1900s. If you were kind of cruising through McAllen or Harlingen or Brownsville back in those days, it would have been like I was describing. I mean, you wouldn't even hardly been able to get out. I mean, it would have been so thick and dense, you wouldn't even recognize it probably. And then as we work clockwise, that first decade of the 1900s, the building of the canals, the arrival of the railroad, all that really just kind of ushered in the kind of the modern era. Folks kind of recruited as we work our way, clockwise through there. Folks kind of getting recruited from other parts of the United States, and brought down here to kind of grow this what became this incredible thriving engine of agriculture, agricultural, culture of growing down here, and that led to our citrus industry and sugarcane and so many other things that really put the valley on the map in terms of economics back in the day. But all that had a tremendous impact on the landscape. So to make way for all that, much of what was forested was cleared, had to be cleared to make way for that. And then, more recently, just kind of in passing here, this is that same concept, but now, if we all are familiar with the region, y'all know that, in the last 25 years that the growth has just kind of blown all the the trade, the expansion, I guess, the NAFTA, then I guess the newer version of that in the last several years has really kind of blown the roof off of development down here. It's the pace of landscape level change is just expanding really quickly now. And a lot of that we can add to that trade coming up through Mexico, and there's that connection there. There's that red line there on the Texas map. We're connected to it all now. And so again, that's contributing to this landscape level, the sea change and what used to be working lands, 25, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, those working lands are now houses, that kind of thing. So we're going through this, major change. Excuse me. This just kind of highlights that. This is like a grab off of Google Earth, but it's an area here in the Westlaco area. This is, Google Earth. This is like 10 years ago. This is like, quote unquote para-urban development. This is kind of stuff out in the country. And that's what that was the yellow boundary. The yellow polygons is basically where you had residential development like 10 years ago. And this is the same shot, I think last year, that kind of thing. And if we could fast forward this another 3 or 4 years, 5 years, those last fields will be filled in with houses too. So most definitely. So that's the kind of, now multiply that across, at least Cameron and Hidalgo County. And it's expanding pretty quickly, the development. This just kind of sums that up. This is from the Tremblay 2005 paper. This is Cameron County, so Brownsville and Harlingen. But based off of aerials that were collected and kind of stitched together, over the period of the 1930s, which is kind of about the earliest that could have been done, right? And then you've got probably the same thing in '83, and then probably satellite imagery from 2001. But you can follow the trajectory there. It's it's pretty certain. I mean, the woodland loss is pretty extraordinary, and we're more or less where we are at the 2001. In 2022, we're more or less about there, maybe even a few less of those spots. That's kind of what we're working with. This is the same trajectory for the other counties, except with the exception of Star. Star's definitely got a lot more intact thorn forest, Thornscrub left, but Willacy, Cameron, and Hidalgo are in the same boat here. So from here on out, we'll just kind of use this as a guide here. I wanted to, we talked a little bit earlier about the impact model for American forests. And so this at the national level, so this is that same model here in the valley. And so if you can pick it up pretty much anywhere here, but if you start at the top, you got building partnerships. Let me start down there at communicate and replicate. As a national nonprofit, we've got a really strong communications team. So they're working to put together video productions. I interface with these folks. Most of them are based in DC, Washington, DC. But I interface with these folks on a regular basis. And so, they're really key in helping me to put together, story, deliverables that tell the story of the work down here, the work that we're putting together. And if you can't, it's like anything else. If you can't communicate that, there's no way you can replicate it. And it's a pretty simple equation there. So whether it's social media, articles, video productions, that kind of thing, it's really key. There's not one thing on here that could be accomplished without the other. I mean, every one of these is equally important to achieving our objectives. On the build partnerships end, it's we'll talk about this more in a minute. Founding the Thornforest Conservation Partnership just a few years back. That's been really a signature piece for us, and the beauty of the partnership, any partnership really, is you're coming together with stakeholders to, in this case, work towards restoration, strategic restoration of the thorn forest here in the valley. We know we can't restore it all. That's not the objective. The objective is to look at this maybe with a fresh set of eyes, build on some of these efforts that Fish and Wildlife and other folks have been pushing so hard for the last 30 or 40 years, and bring some of our expertise to the table and find those, like we were talking about earlier, find those gaps in capacity that we can help kind of fill. And to the extent that I am an employee of American Forest, but to the extent that I'm also the chair of the TCP, it's almost like wearing two hats in a sense, but it really isn't, because you're coming together with partners and you're figuring out where that capacity is needed. And if we don't want to reinvent the wheel, if somebody can pick up the difference or focus, for example, research, you can focus that in a certain area. I don't need a science staff. I don't need to to do, I'm just using this as an example, but there's certain things that maybe necessarily I don't need to do. I don't need to, it's all about resources. I don't need to expend those resources to really do that when I can, rely on some other folks to do that. Of course, you obviously do need resources. You need time and money and et cetera. Those are the caveats, but having that partnership there shows me as an American Forests employee that, there's certain areas that are, certain gaps that I can probably focus my efforts on, and that would be a better use of everyone's time, that kind of thing. So it's really like a shared stewardship approach. That's really what it comes down to. So that's a seminal development here. And then, as we've gone along, we've gotten involved more and more with community engagement. That's such a critical piece, developing MOUs, environmental literacy programming with local governments. That's becoming like a huge thing for us. And it complements everything else that we're trying to do at the landscape level. Restoration capacity, and we've stepped in to assist on seed collection for everything begins with the seed, right? I mean, we can't talk about doing massive restoration of Thornscrub if we don't have that source of seeds in place. So we're fairly new to that, but we're getting involved there as well with staff capacity. Sponsored research, moving into that area as well, trying to look at best management practices for forest management. Again, looking at some of these gaps in research that maybe have existed for a while, and trying to fill those. And then the planning that's guided by science, Thornforest Conservation Plan, climate resilience strategy. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Restoration funding and policy advocacy at the national level. Again, if you don't have somebody looking out for you at the national level, we could put our best effort we can possibly do together down here, and it may not go very far because we're not looking at that national picture, and trying to get our piece of it at that higher level. That's the way it works for pretty much anything. And then we'll just, for the last 25 years, we've sponsored tree planting on public lands in the valley. So that's up over 2 million trees since '97. So that's pretty substantial. The partnership, the TCP, the Thornforest Conservation Partnership, originally started out as Thornscrub. Again, love it. Love the semantics. Kind of a rebranding there. But these are some of the major players. There's others, obviously, but these are some of the major players that come together. And we try to do this on a quarterly basis. I know some of y'all are on the call and you're waiting for that next meeting, so it's coming. Just hang on, guys. But yeah, UTRGV, A&M Kingsville, Cesar Clayburgh, Texas Parks and Wildlife, A&M Forest Service, the Conservancy. So just it's just been, and it's just kind of it's been great to get to know everyone and realize that we're all working towards this common goal of trying to put at least parts of this ecosystem back together, and knowing that, there's, with all the development, the tide of development, there's always every day passes, there's less time to do it, but we've kind of found each other and working towards that goal. I'll just give you a little bit of an overview here of the efforts up to this point. The capacity is land managers, so you can look at it there. There's pretty much got everybody under the tent, at least contributing on a regular basis to this objective of preserving biodiversity here through restoration. Restoration is the key, because there is so little of the habitat left. That first order has always been to catalyze and expand that habitat, not just for species recovery, right? Whether it's the ocelot or the Texas tortoise or whatever species, but it's really to provide that connectivity, because as we all know, it's without in this kind of a landscape, this fragmented landscape, if that connectivity isn't there, then there isn't going to be much of a future for those isolated core areas of, Thornscrub. So that's the first order. And then the process, our initial process in coming up with the product there at the bottom, is the Thornforest Conservation Plan. So that is really has been our first really, kind of collective effort, deliverable. And that first version of it came out in 2020, kind of like a beta version, if you will. There's an update that will be out in the next week, actually, believe it or not. And that's the link down there to it. If you go there now, you're gonna find the 2020 version. So if you'll give me a few more days, I'll have this awesome graphically designed version of the plan. But the idea there, the process, I'll go back up a little bit. The process is modeling and analysis, a movement analysis, to generate, at the end of the day, these top potential restoration sites throughout the 4 counties, which, according to this analysis, it's roughly about 81,000 acres, that we would like to restore over time. And the kicker there is that only 30% of that total is on public lands. So, fish and wildlife or state lands, that kind of thing. And that may go up or down over time, depending on, future acquisitions that, fish might put together, or the state, that kind of thing. But it just underscores the need to, and that's kind of where we want to turn eventually here in the near future, is turn towards incentives for private lands restoration. Down here, and what we can hopefully put together between things like the state acres for wildlife enhancement, some of the NRCS offerings, and maybe even some carbon finance, carbon markets down the road. That remains to be seen. But if we don't have an understanding of what we're coming into here, 30% of that total on public lands, the other 70% on private lands. If we don't have that understanding, then we can't develop the tools. We can't develop the approaches that we need to pursue, what's going to be necessary to build that connectivity down here. That's really important. The conservation plan is setting the table, basically, for what we kind of envision moving forward, or what we're already moving towards. And then, so the next steps, really the current steps for the partnership, is, developing and implementing really a business plan. Well, we've been in the process of this for about a year and going on a year and a half. But it's better to get it done the right way than having to do it over and over again. We're using a NIFWIF, a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation model, for the business plan. But it will basically end up being a roadmap for the conservation plan's implementation. And I'm expecting to have at least a draft of that later this year. And the major components of that, like any business plan, you're looking at developing those conservation goals and metrics for the landscape, and from anywhere from the landscape level down to the individual species, So, for species like the ocelot there, it's as a group of partners, what are we, irrespective of what other, not really irrespective, but we're going to complement all these other activities that are going forward right now that are, in terms of ocelot conservation that are going forward, whether it's the concept of translocation, wildlife crossings, that kind of thing. But with expertise in the reforestation part of that, and knowing that we can't, get to the next level in recovery for that species without more reforestation, habitat restoration. I'm using them kind of interchangeably here right now. But with that expertise there, and everybody around the table that's part of this effort, what are we willing to put forward as individuals and as a group to kind of, meet these restoration goals that are in the conservation plan over time. So that figures into those goals. What are we gonna say on conservation goals? Are we gonna create another ocelot population? It's really more about, for us in this effort, it's more about, how many acres are we going to restore around some of those occupied habitats, maybe on the Itudia Ranch or those kinds of things. So those are in the process of being developed. An implementation plan, obviously due diligence there, the risk assessment, what could destabilize these efforts, what could throw them off, and then of course a budget for it'll be a 10-year horizon on the budget, on the business plan for that sustained effort. So those are the next steps. Habitat restoration, this is all kind of, again, following that model I had up, or that impact model for the valley I had up a few slides ago, kind of like the wheel, called the wheel. Habitat restoration in the Rio Grande Valley public lands. This is kind of where we've been really working side by side with the Fish and Wildlife Service for the last 25 years on public lands restoration. And so, these are just, rough figures here, but, roughly 150 to 200,000 trees planted annually, 16,000 acres since '82. The Fish and Wildlife Service has been going at this for about 40 years now, which is remarkable within the agency. And obviously they are in a class by themselves when it comes to restoration here in the region. But that partner support is becoming even more and more critical, because it's not cheap. It's not cheap to go out there and attempt this kind of an effort. The needs, again, why is this being done? These really just mirror kind of, American forest needs right now. I mean, increased landscape connectivity, expand restoration capacity, and then again, invest in that research to target those best management practices. And that thing on that sequence there on the left is a tract on the river. That was, originally cropland going back to like 95. And then, the planting happened somewhere between 95 and 06. You can kind of see lines of trees in there. And then by 19, you had a really good, mostly closed canopy in there, that kind of thing. So, and I've been referencing this over and over again, but this is the National Wildlife Refuge System here in the valley. So, Laguna Atascosa on the coast, Brandon Jones managing out there, and then Lower Rio Grande Valley, scattered throughout the region, and then, Santa Ana down there, Emer's Refuge. And so this is where we've been focusing a lot of the restoration, that assistance on restoration. This is where we've been focusing that. American Forest has long before I arrived, but this is the focus. So the program, the Fish and Wildlife Services in-house program, is what we have been focusing, that staff capacity I was talking about earlier, that assist. We've been focusing that really on up to this point, we're focusing that effort on the Fish and Wildlife Services in-house restoration program. And there's a lot of moving parts. There's again, you can't have one without another. It's the planning, it's the seedling production, that part of it, and then obviously the outplanting. And then beyond that, you even have the success monitoring. So these are all, they're all, everything has its place and it has its season and it has its time. And without any one of these, it's a failure. It will be a failure, the effort for any given year, because you have to have all these kind of working in concert uh, to realize any kind of an outing, a planting each year. So this is some of the work that we've kind of taken the reins on over the last year and a half. This is my program manager, Giselle Garza, up in the top right hand side there. She's a recent UTRGV master's graduate, and she's out there nonstop throughout the year. Rain, rains, rain or sun, she's out there collecting seeds. And we've got really a 12-month window to collect down here because we rarely freeze. And so the freeze is coming up on the next slide, by the way. I think in the next couple of slides. But yeah, she's out there doing she's helping to meet what we call collection goals. The Fish and Wildlife Services has a set collection goal for each species, and we're working. These are basically all hardwood. We'll call them hardwood species. So we don't have conifers, and so like out west, my colleagues out west restore landscapes in national forests with like 3 or 4 species. We're doing restoration down here with like 25, 30, maybe even 40 species. And Giselle's out there collecting, and there's a steep learning curve. Really, if you can imagine, there's a steep learning curve with trying to figure out, what times of the year the different species might be available, or the different locations, that kind of thing. We're trying to do wild collection. This is wild collection from areas throughout the valley. So we're traversing basically the 4 counties looking for populations of these different species and collecting from those to kind of build that genetic diversity into the outplantings. So those are just different species that she's collected there, and you can kind of see the process, the cleaning the pulp off, and then storage, and then you grow them out. And it all depends. It all varies on the species. Some species have to be planted immediately after you collect them, and some can be put in storage. It's just kind of like a grab bag. There's a lot of variation there, and then obviously it ends up out in the field. And I'll just mention this really quick. I mean, without this kind of an effort out there, we wouldn't have really, we can anecdotally talk about these kinds of things, but I mean, here's the hard proof, that February 21 freeze really threw off our phonology on a number of species here. We're talking about Texas ebony here because it's a dominant here in these Thornscrub forest ecosystems pretty much across the board. And that expected collection time, wasn't there last summer. So the net result of all this is that, with these kinds of events, it doesn't have to be a freeze. It could be, maybe extreme flooding, that kind of thing. The net result is that, your phenology, your flowering, your fruiting, all that's thrown off. And then you may not be able to actually, if you're collecting seeds from year to year, you may not actually be able to pick up the slack there in time to get, the next year's planting seeded in the springtime. You're gonna grow your stuff out from basically March to October, November, and then plant in the winter down here. So we escape, that kind of heat stress in the summertime. But events like this really kind of throw that off. So you've got to kind of factor these things. You can't factor the freeze. No one knows that that's going to happen, but it's one more reason why you really have to have the methodology built up around your seed collections, and kind of follow how much you have in storage and how much you're going to use each year, because you might have to fall back on some of that in an unexpected circumstance like this. I know we're running out of time here, so I'm going to go these next slides really quick. Advances in program restoration methodology. So things that weren't done before the teens. Tree shelters are now generally standard on planting. So those are over the top of the seedlings for the first 1 to 3 years. They retain that soil moisture and promote quicker establishment. And then we're dealing with high density outplantings. We're shooting, on Fish and Wildlife lands, we're shooting for about 1,000 seedlings per acre right now. And then, of course, continue planting that diversity of species and continue on with invasive grass control measures, because that's one of our really difficult things to fight down here is, the invasive grasses, and they getting established in the plots and kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of short circuiting the process of succession in there, but when they overwhelm the seedlings. And I talked about this earlier, but American Forest climate resilience. So one of our objectives has been to incorporate, continuing objectives is to try to incorporate climate change planning into restoration here. Whether that's in extreme weather, we talk about projections for the state, right? That includes this region, intensified drought. Is the drought of record from the 50s, is that coming back somewhere down the road? There's going to be more of those, that kind of thing. Intensified storms, flooding, those kinds of things. The idea is that, we might be able to enhance forest survival by selecting species with that greater drought or flood tolerance. Again, be explicit in where you're planting different species, whether it be on the river or uplands, that kind of thing. And improve resilience of outplantings by diversifying those seed collection sources. And this kind of codifies that strategy. This is available on the ServCat there, Fish and Wildlife's library there at that website. So this is kind of the strategy that we put together. I guess we finished it up last year. This strategy is kind of what we're following to help the program kind of take note and take the measure of some of these strategies for climate resilience, and so things like this could help the program really anywhere. I mean, but any geography, but with technical reports like this, they can help shed light on what's worked, what hasn't in the past. And there's a lot of history in this thing about the restoration program. There's like a retrospective in there that goes back to the Parks and Wildlife Department's efforts to first do restoration for white-winged doves back in the 50s, that kind of thing. Pittman Robertson, all that kind of stuff. So I would recommend this. This is a great primer for the Valley for restoration down here. Sponsored research. This is kind of what I described we were getting into more recently, but yeah, working with, whether it's partners at UTRGV or Cesar Clayburgh, that kind of thing. Lab and field-based applications, obviously, individual species. These are just, some of the things that we're hashing out right now, but, responses to drought among individual species, survivorship. We talk about, planting 1,000 trees per acre, but, or plants per acre, but, what does post-plant recruitment look like? What species are going to move in at what levels, no matter what, into some of these restored plots. So we need to have an understanding of all of this if we're going to inform that restoration planning and implementation. And there's a lot of serious gaps there, but again, hopefully working together with conservation partnership stakeholders, we can help address a lot of this over the next several years. And then I last but not least, community engagement. These kinds of things are really important. Sometimes restoration out there on agency lands it seems like it's, or anywhere really, it's like almost like it's taking. It can take anything like that. It can take place like in a bubble. But the idea here is to kind of introduce larger segments of the Valley's population to this concept of restoration and why it's so important for economic resilience or community resilience or biodiversity conservation, all of that. So those tangibles are education. We're offering limited environmental literacy series at a couple different locations starting this last year. You have, once you've done a small planting, those 1 acre thorn forest plantings, you have some, there's some substance there for recreation. And then probably the most important thing here maybe not the most important, but that county level MOU to kind of expand that concept to other regions of the county. And then the bigger picture is that, facilitating the connection to nature, developing that sense of place, all these things that could be lacking, that really helps pull all together. Acknowledgements, Wildlife Conservation Society, it was really very instrumental in pulling together the drought resilience strategy. But as you can see here, there's just a lot of folks who have helped us kind of realize this vision and have gotten us to this point. So I'm very thankful to all of these all of these organizations. And that's all I've got. If I want to learn more, that's our website there. Appreciate it. Thank y'all for y'all's time.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes. We could go a little bit over for questions if you want. So I've got the Q&A here. I think some people were asking questions in the chat, so I'll try to bounce back and forth and see what we can deal with. I'll try to get some quick ones done. So in the thorn scrub types, which one was the Loma? Did you have that in the pictures? The person asking the question has a hard time identifying the type.
Yeah, I don't have a Loma picture on there, sorry.
Okay. Where did the seeds, this specifically was, I think, for a slide, but they're just curious where the seeds come from.
So we have, that's a good question. We have we have permits to collect seeds on federal lands and state lands. We have permits to collect from Laguna Atascosa and Lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge, and also we have a permit from the state, from Texas Parks and Wildlife. So we will collect from like the some of the units of Las Palomas, that kind of thing. And the idea, the reason behind all that is that there isn't a whole lot of mature thorn scrub outside of those protected areas. We also do some collection on private lands as well, though.
Okay, here's an interesting one. The lease of a Loma Ecological Preserve area within the Port of Brownsville Navigation District is expiring next year. Fish and Wildlife Management, are managing it. Are you working with Navigation District to renew that lease?
I am not working with them right now. Yeah, I am aware of that situation, but I am not a party to any negotiation with the Navigation District right now.
Okay. Have any of your reforested areas been impacted by wildfire?
Oh yeah. There's if you go back, so if you go back in time and look at the areas that have been restored going back into the 1980s, there's quite a few areas that have been impacted by that. There's burn scars out there from lightning strikes, everything from lightning strikes to kind of illicit fires, closer to the river, that kind of thing. But there are federal dollars to go back in and do specific, actions, restoration actions around those fires. Those pots of money do exist. But yeah, there's been, any number of individual fires out there.
John, do you mind if I send out a blast chat with your email address?
Absolutely.
Okay, there you
Yeah.
go. That should be going to everybody. Let's see. Next one here. Does American Forest purchase land to reforest?
We don't. We do not do land acquisition. That's more in the department of the Conservation Fund and then the Nature Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service. We do advocate for it at national levels, especially in this ecosystem where you don't have, there's no rotation. We're not harvesting forest out there. It's not pines in East Texas kind of thing. We plant it and we kind of walk away from it. Not exactly like that, but it's a little bit different dynamic down here. So you really, among other things, you have to continue to purchase lands down here.
Okay. How close was that 2019 restored tract to actual occupied ocelot properties?
The one on the slide is not near any any active ocelot subpopulation. The ocelot subpopulations are up in the northeast corner of the valley. They're up on the coast between Laguna, Atascosa, El Saus, and the Ituria ranches. Those are the known ocelot subpopulations.
Okay, have there been any state transition simulation models developed for the different thorn forest types within the valley? And if so, are they published or being implemented into your conservation plan?
I don't believe so, and I don't have them. I don't have them in there. No.
Okay, from the early 1900s, let's start over. From the early 1900s imagery that you presented showing the urbanization impacting native veg, how did American Forests and other organizations combat woody encroachment for the thorn forest conservation and ranchers participating in land clearing for cattle grazing? And so how did you combat woody invasion from other forest types, vegetation types?
I'm trying to understand that question. We're not. So if you look at some of the programs that Jesus Franco and the Rio Grande joint venture have put together for private landowners and NRCS north of the valley, maybe even into the 4 counties here, we're not really a part of that right now. We're really just focused on public lands right now. So I mean, if the question was more along the lines of like, is there maybe brush encroaching from federal lands into private lands? We're not combating that. We're not a part of combating that right now.
Okay, we'll probably do 1 or 2 more here because we're about done with time. Why is restoration rate of 1,000 seedlings per acre when dense? So why is your restoration rate set at 1,000 seedlings per acre when dense thorn scrub stands are 8,000? It seems if the goal is restoration of dense, then you might want to try to do more than that.
We would love to. I mean, that's a great way to look at it. We would love to do that. The limiting factor is availability of plants, right? We have outside of the Fish and Wildlife Service's in-house nursery, which produces a certain percentage of those seedlings that are needed each year. There's a small group of private growers that fulfill the rest of those contracts to make that total, and that's something else that we're working on at a higher level, is to try to bring in additional capacity and start additional nurseries. Ways we could do that. I would love to be able to do that. I don't think I would plant at the 8,000 because, I mean, that 8,000 figures looking at probably recruitment that had been going on there for decades. Those are mature sites probably that have never been cleared, at least not in historical memory that I was describing there, that 3,000 to 8,000.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a good business opportunity for someone to open up a nursery for you.
Yeah, if you like hard work.
All right, I'm gonna do this last one. I'm gonna do 1 more here, and then for folks who have questions that are burning in your brains, you could send John an email that I sent in the chat to everybody.
Please.
Well, sorry, I just had it, now I lost it. Here's a tough one for you. If restoration has been going on since the 50s, why do we not yet have an understanding of what to do and how to grow things?
Yeah, so a lot of those early efforts, a lot of the early restoration efforts were focused on like 2 or 3 or maybe a handful of species. And so like anything else, programs evolve over time. What we've been trying to do over the last, we'll say like 20 years, probably 20 plus, is try to get the most diversity. Like, so not obviously can't replicate what we're clearing, and that, I've talked about that a little bit earlier. We're not trying to restore the whole region, and we can't necessarily replicate what was cleared, however many years ago. But we've been trying to go back in with, a greater diversity of species to try to give an approximation of those more mature thorn forest sites. So a lot of that early stuff was focused on going in and planting like rows and rows of like ebony trees, like a plantation of ebony trees or huisache or mesquite, that kind of thing. And some of those things just didn't work out. I mean, we can go back out to some of these tracks that were planted probably in the mid 80s. They were direct seeded. And you've got rows and rows of ebony trees. There's like no understory. It's like a monotypic ebony piece. So, I mean, I guess the answer to that, as things, that their original understanding of things has evolved over time.